It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. Now, you can find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting if you email me directly at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. Our archives you can find for free at Spreaker.com. I do a live show there every Friday night, which I'm going to start coordinating. I'm going to start doing a live TikTok while I'm doing that show, too, so you can see how bad I look these days. I've fallen apart in the past 3 years. So you can see how I'm dying over here in front of your eyes. And if you go to Spreaker.com, there's a chat room. You get an email notification when you put up content, live show Friday nights. But if you go there and look up Ian Totten, the Deathcast, you can find our previous shows with my friend here, Ian Totten. We've had him on here about Seville, West Memphis 3, and a couple others I'm sure that he'll remind us of at least 3 or 4 times. So he's an old friend of the show. He's been around a long time. He's a really good friend, a very, very good guy, a nice guy, family man, hard-working man. Mr. Ian Totten, are you there?
Hello, Ed. Yes, I am. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
I had no choice, man. I called up you and you picked up. Okay. I don't know. I'm in a crazy mood today. I don't know what it is. So remind the audience, so who is Ian Totten and what is the Deathcast?
I am a journalist. I'm an author. I am a part-time PI. I'm a true crime podcaster. The Deathcast is a weekly, very deep dive podcast covering various cases from around the world. Really anything that catches my attention and that I can sink my teeth into and dig deep into. Not like other podcasts who'll do 1 or 2 episodes. When I get on a case, I can go anywhere from 4 or 5 episodes to the case of Jimmy Savile, 14 episodes. So I really get into the cases and try and explore every aspect of it that is newsworthy or of interest or new information that I have found.
Now, remember, we had you on previously about Jimmy Savile, West Memphis 3. What else?
We spoke about the Atlanta child murders.
Okay.
What else have I been on about? Off the top of my head, we did those 3. I came on, trying to remember. You know
what I'm thinking, though? Because you interviewed me, too, at least once or twice. So maybe that's why I'm thinking. Because you're a good friend. We're friends on social media, too, as well. People can find Ian Totten on Facebook. It's called the Deathcast Facebook page. You can find his website at deathcast.simplecast for all his content. Now, Ian, on a personal note, before we get into this whole thing, we're going to be talking about OJ today and some of your other cases, maybe Vince McMahon and some other things you're always into. But on a personal note, man, you're going through some really serious family crises right now, and you're really, I got to tell you, man, I'm really impressed by the way you're holding up. Why don't you give us an idea of what's going on?
Okay, so, I have a day job, as most people do. And unfortunately, the day job has been sporadic as I work on military bases, and they're under contract because all the stuff going on with the government and budget cuts, etc. A lot of my contracts have ended, which means that I end up working for 3 or 4 weeks out of state and then not working for 3 or 4 weeks. In fact, I've been off for the last 3 weeks since I returned from California. And when I returned from California 2 weeks ago, my wife wasn't feeling well. And on that Wednesday, I ended up having to rush her to the ER at the hospital because she could not breathe. Now, we have 3 small children. It was a real rigmarole getting people to take care of the kids while all of this was going on. It turns out that she has severe COPD, possibility of lung cancer, although that particular prognosis is looking as though it was a false prognosis, which we're hoping for. And in the midst of all this, because of what's going on with work, our power got shut off. We're behind thousands of dollars on our bills because I just can't keep up despite, working like a dog when I do have work, taking on side work, going to pretty much every length that I can in order to try and keep our heads above water, keep the house that I purchased using a VA loan 5 years ago, feed our kids, everything. We were thrown for a loop one after the other. I got our tax return. That was gone within moments as I tried to pay down our mortgage, which I fell behind on. It's been a real difficult stretch of life. And I've been blessed. A lot of people have stepped up that I wasn't expecting to.
Yeah, Ian, I'm so sorry to hear all this, man. He had a beautiful wife. There's a picture here. If you go to the GoFundMe, you can just Google Save Our Ship, and it comes up the top one, Ian Totten, Save Our Ship. Beautiful wife sitting there. COPD is a horrible, horrible thing to go through, and then to have your oxygen shut off. Due to our capitalism in this country here. It's heartbreaking. So people can go to this GoFundMe, and every little bit helps, man. If we could all chip in and help each other out when one of us is going through a hard time and another one's not, and then vice versa, later on in the future when you need help, and the other guy's turn around. I'm sure Ian's helped me in the past. I'm sure he has. He's a member of my Patreon. I know he is. So Ian Totten, Save Our Ship on GoFundMe. GoFundMe, Save Our Ship. And they're trying to raise $7,000. They've got less than half. So we really, really, really need the Opperman Report family to step up here and help one of our friends. We got another good friend, too. It's Courtney, who's been on our show. We just went through brain surgery. Now, they may be sending her home, but they're sending her home with those electrodes and those cables still in her head. So that's a whole nother story. I guess she couldn't pay the bill, so they kept them in there. But my lovely friend Courtney, again, too, we need to have her in our prayers, and Ian Totten's family and his beautiful wife here. You can see on Save Our Ship on GoFundMe, Mr. Ian Totten. Oh, boy.
Yeah, life. Nobody prepares you for this kind of thing happening out of nowhere.
So true, right, man? So your latest endeavor on the Deathcast podcast is you took on the OJ case. Now, did you begin this before he died or after he died? Because I'm a little suspicious, man. Where were you the night he died?
I was actually in Susanville, California. I started the case in about mid to late February. It's actually one of the cases I wanted to cover when I started the show. Yeah. Because let's be honest, this is the biggest case in U.S. history. I don't mean in terms of, the implications of it, but in terms of media and societal interest. There is no bigger case. Even the Lindbergh case didn't get the type of attention that the O.J. Simpson case did.
And it started with that slow-speed Bronco chase that everyone was riveted to their TV screens watching that. I actually took a pause, and I ran out and bought beer and came back to sit there and enjoy that chase. And I was addicted, man, ever since. I watched the whole trial all day long, and then Court TV would repeat it at night. I would watch it a second time. Just totally addicted to that case, man. So where do we start? Where does the Deathcast podcast start on the O.J. Simpson case?
The Deathcast podcast, I really start with who O.J. Simpson was. He was a somewhat impoverished kid coming from from San Francisco. He ends up getting into football while he's in high school. He gets into college. And from college, he ends up getting picked up by NFL teams. It was really an unlikely underdog story. When you consider the fact that when he was a kid, he was into some pretty bad stuff. He was involved in gangs, all of that type of thing. And he goes, it's that rags to riches story of he ends up getting traded in the early 1970s to a football team, and he goes from being, an afterthought to this amazing football player who, got world renowned for it, and transitioning from that into an acting career in a slew of movies, TV commercials, endorsements, that type of thing. And all this is going on. He's in college. He marries his first wife, Marguerite. They have children. He is completely unfaithful to her throughout the entirety of their marriage. Although after the murders happened, she claims that, he never hit her or anything like that.
Well, you know what else? When they were dating, they were passing her back and forth between OJ and Al Cowlings.
Yes, I've heard that.
Yeah.
I've read interviews with people stating that. Unfortunately, I can't verify it. She's been very guarded about everything that she's ever said about OJ. It's probably because he was giving her, a monthly stipend. But she was very guarded about things, after these murders took place. Oh, he was just unfaithful to me. There was no violence or anything like that. But at the trial, it came out that the police had numerous reports of her calling the police because he was physically assaulting her. And the first part, it's Death in L.A., OJ and Nicole. We discuss who Nicole was. She was born overseas, grew up in California, was working at a restaurant when she had met O.J. Simpson in 1978, I believe it was. At the age of 18, fresh out of high school, he's a 30-year-old man, and they begin a relationship. This relationship culminates with O.J. and Nicole getting married in 1985. And even before they ended up getting married, there were numerous instances of Nicole calling the police because O.J. was abusing her. There's stories of him taking all of her possessions and throwing them out in the street and demanding that she get out of the house, taking baseball bats to the windows of her car. Really just, an overbearing, controlling psychopath.
I had a guest on my show who actually was the private investigator for Bill Menser. Tony Washington, Tony Spurl, he goes by a couple of different names. Interesting guy, okay? He works for Larry Flint, too, as one of his bodyguards, but, slash, who knows what. But he knows all those guys. And he told me, because West Tech, he had did some work for West Tech, and West Tech would show up at the house to break up their fights. And the guy, the author, Tom Laughlin from Billy Jack, was their neighbor, and he would go over there and mediate their disputes.
Yes, and I mean, there are stories that are verifiable through police records of the police showing up and Nicole being half naked, bleeding outside of the house in terror of him, and the police turning a blind eye because OJ flashes a smile, signs a couple autographs. He was very charismatic. And the police going home. And this culminated on New Year's Day, 1989, when the police were called. They show up, and Nicole is hiding outside the North Rockingham home in the bushes. And when the police show up, she comes running out saying, "He's going to kill me, he's going to kill me." And OJ comes out, cussing up a storm, and she's trying to ruin my life. This ends up getting OJ charged with spousal abuse, and he ends up copping a plea bargain to this. Basically, he ends up doing some community service, but that's really the beginning of the end of their marriage. OJ has consistently denied that he ever abused his ex-wife. Even up until the day he died. They ended up getting divorced in the early 90s, and after they get divorced, they try and reconcile because, of course, they have 2 children of their own.
Did they lose a child, a death in their family, he and Marguerite?
Yes, in 1977, 78, somewhere around there, right before they got divorced, they had a child who ended up drowning in a pool. And that was one of many factors that led to the disillusionment of their marriage.
Oh, yeah. The marriage has barely ever survived the death of a child. Very interesting, too, his early life. I heard that he's practically illiterate, so how he went to USC and graduated USC. But then his father was a female impersonator who died from AIDS, and his mother worked at the mental institution, the hospital, where Jim Jones used to go and recruit people from that hospital. This is like Forrest Gump almost,
Oh, it is. I mean, if you look at his early life and his life in general, there's so many intersections with people who are, of historical note that it's mind-boggling.
Yeah.
He got through college based on his athletic ability, and the fact that he was extremely charismatic, and could get people to kind of turn a blind eye to any of his misdeeds, or the fact that he wasn't, doing any of his schoolwork, because then, as it still exists to some extent today, if you're a great athlete, you're kind of given a free pass through college. Because these coaches and these colleges are making mega money off of that kind of thing.
Oh, yeah. And now it's even 100 times worse, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So... yeah, but OJ and Nicole, though, after they divorced, they tried to reconcile, but his behaviors continued. He would go to the house, kick down the door. In fact, and a guest that you had on the show put out a film, I believe it was called "Who Killed Nicole," where they play audio of the 911 call where OJ comes back to Nicole's house, and he's screaming in the background about drugs and prostitution.
Heidi Fleiss girls.
Yes, and her giving oral sex to her boyfriend in front of the children, that type of thing. And it's known that Nicole ran with a pretty wild crowd, which is not surprising given the time period we're talking and that OJ was a celebrity. Cocaine was very prevalent. I believe Faye Resnick, told some pretty scandalous stories about Nicole and the things that she was involved with. Whether or not all of that is true, we can't really verify it, because at the time that she said all of these things, Resnick was pretty out of her mind on cocaine.
Faye Resnick is a very interesting woman. She's friends with those Kim Richards from Growing Pains and all that kid star. Kim Richards, Charlie Sheen's ex-wife, who was Heidi Fleiss girl. But I was told about Faye Resnick that when Faye Resnick was a teenager, if they had reality TV, she would have been more famous than Paris Hilton.
Oh, yes.
Because she had that same lifestyle. And if you look at the Mark Ebner, where he got Paris Hilton's cell phone, her phone was filled with phone calls to drug dealers, bail bondsmen, escort services. So what the hell was she? With that guy, Joe Francis, she's flying around on planes with Joe Francis back and forth to Mexico, before Girls Gone Wild. So Faye Resnick's a fascinating character in all this.
Oh, yes, she is. And, she really stirred the pot once things got rolling as far as the media circus that enveloped this case. But we know OJ had, at some point in his life, issues with cocaine usage, and it's not outside the realm of possibility that Nicole had the same type of problems. They have money. They really don't have to, quote unquote, work for that money, like a 9-to-5 job. People indulge in things in order to, take care of the boredom.
Yeah.
And cocaine is one of those things. We do know from credible sources that, Nicole liked to party.
Yeah, the whole bunch. Yeah, A.C. Callens, that whole bunch. With Jim Brown, as soon as he heard about the death, the first thing he says, well, everybody knows O.J. was selling coke. And the person, it was live on TV. First thing he says. And Steve Garvey, when Steve Garvey got divorced with his first wife when he was with the Dodgers. Mm-hmm. His wife in the divorce papers accused that whole bunch of dealing coke and smuggling coke. Bruce Jenner, Steve Garvey, and OJ and that whole crew were all dealing drugs.
And that's not outside the realm of possibility when you can look at what Simpson was doing for a public living versus the lifestyle he was living. That Rockingham estate was not cheap. Mm. He purchased it, I believe, at the time when he purchased it for $5 million in 1984-85. That's a lot of money for a guy who...
Wait, $19 million?
No, $5 million.
Oh, $5 million, okay.
that's a lot of money in 1984, 1985 money for a guy who is really just a second string B actor and is starring in a bunch of TV commercials.
He had a bunch of businesses, though, coffee shops and Hertz dealerships,
yeah. And that's one of the things that OJ used to control Nicole and keep her to him, is the fact that when they were married, all of this abuse that's going on, he's giving jobs to her family members at his various businesses. After the 1989 police involvement, he basically told Nicole, look, I was going to give your dad the job at my Hertz dealership, but, if this goes through, I can't do it. So he was a very controlling and manipulative person, and Nicole's father, in fact, told her the same thing, that, you're going to cost your family a job. So she was kind of stuck into that position, through no fault of her own. There is such a thing as battered woman syndrome. I am almost certain that she was dealing with that. But this all culminated, all of this stuff that's going on, OJ's jealousy, Nicole having boyfriends, OJ having girlfriends, in the night of June 12th, 1994. And I remember breaking news on, the local Channel 11 in New Jersey when this happened, that they stated that, ex-wife O.J. Simpson, Nicole Brown Simpson, and another unidentified man have been found murdered at Nicole Brown Simpson's South Bundy bungalow. And it was really, off and running from that point, because we hadn't really had a crime like this where you have a beautiful blonde woman in her mid-30s who's savagely murdered. Her husband's a celebrity, and this good-looking guy who worked at a waiter, who at that point nobody knew why he was at her home. Were they having a relationship? Was he selling her drugs? What's going on? And if you look at the crimes, I mean, these were obviously acts of revenge, at least as far as Nicole is concerned.
Some people have described those the neck wounds as Colombian neckties.
I have I have photographs, like physical photographs of Nicole's wounds. Her head was nearly severed.
Yeah,
it was one swipe across her neck. The pathologist who went over the bodies pretty much stated that it was his belief that she was hit from behind, knocked to the ground. The person who did it grabbed her hair, pulled her head back, and then slashed her throat and left her to die. And that's based on the severity of the wound. When you pull the person's head back like that, all the neck tendons tighten up and they're bulging out, and all of it was severed. I don't want to get too descriptive, but if you look at the photographs, you can actually see her larynx. So these weren't just, superficial wounds. This was a wound intended to kill. And then Ron Goldman was also hit from behind. His throat was it wasn't a single slash. It was 2 slashes, one on each side of his throat, along with various stab wounds to his body, which are thought to have been defensive wounds.
I had Bill Deere on. I haven't aired the show yet, but I taped with him the other day. And he's the one who's convinced it was Jason Arnell. And I got to tell you, he's really obsessed with this. He bought Jason's Jeep. He bought he went to the storage locker. He bought the storage locker. And this guy's really, one of the things he pointed out to me, which is very interesting, because here we have bloody shoe prints at the crime scene, and they're allegedly traced back to OJ. But there was no blood found on the brake pedal or the gas pedal of the Bronco.
No, and that is a very interesting fact. I mean, there's blood found at the crime scene.
Oh, yeah.
On the side gate and even behind Nicole Brown Simpson's bungalow in the driveway. There's no blood found on the seats or on the floorboards of the car. Where the blood is discovered is actually on the center console, where it's surmised that Simpson, after committing these crimes and cutting his hand during the course of these crimes, was fumbling around trying to find the light bulb that he had removed from the interior of his Bronco. That's not to say that, he didn't bring another pair of shoes. That's one of those instances where the chronology and the evidence doesn't support what the prosecution was saying. If he's got blood all over his shoes, as they state, it's not going to disappear within a couple of steps, which is what we have at the crime scene. It's going to last.
Come on. Yeah, the DNA, even back in those days, the traces, give me a break.
Luminol testing.
Right.
There would have been blood there, but there was not. There was only blood in a very specific area of the car. But back to the crime itself, neighbors thought that there was a burglary going on in the neighborhood after they heard Nicole's dog barking. And the dog shows up. It's got blood all over its paws. And they trace it back to the house. They contact the police thinking that there's a burglary. The first officer on scene actually discovers the bodies somewhere around 12 a.m. And after they discover the bodies, the media immediately gets a hold of this, and they're camped out in the street because it's come out that right away that this is probably O.J. Simpson's ex-wife. And they're looking into, what's going on. The officers responsible, Van Adder and Lang, show up at the crime scene. And unfortunately for these two officers, there was so much going on. It's obvious this is such a high-profile case. They are pulled in numerous directions at the same time, and they can't process the one crime scene thoroughly because of that.
Really interesting about the history of those two is they were both involved, or at least one of them was, with the Manson and also the 4 on the Floor murders with John Holmes.
Yes, I covered that case.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I think you did. Yeah.
Yes.
So that's interesting, right there. Those guys were involved in that too. And you want to know what else is something really kind of funny? The limo driver. Mm-hmm. His mother was the lawyer for Charles Manson. Oh no, for Van Houten.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, good. Yeah, you know that, sir. Okay, great. Yeah.
Oh yeah. No. I'm not an expert on Manson, but I'm fairly well versed in him. I covered him on the show as well about a year ago in a 12-part series. Like I said, there's a lot of crazy intersecting throughout this story with various historical figures that makes you scratch your head and wonder what's really going on in Hollywood.
Yeah.
But after the bodies are discovered, it is hours before any members of the SIDS team, which is the Crime Scene Investigation Unit, shows up on site and the officers can begin processing the crime scene. And one of the major missteps made early on in the case is because of the media being present during all this is Officer Tom Lang, who was the lead detective on the case. He places a blanket over Nicole's body so that they can't get any pictures of it.
And even in 1994, that's insane.
Yes.
You hear these stories, I do a lot of interviews. Okay, back in the 70s, and they did this stupid thing, they did that stupid thing. But come on, man. But everyone, even the 80s, man, people knew not to do that kind of stuff. Although they did it to that kid, too, in Ferguson, too. They did it to him, too, as well. But, anyway.
Yeah, well, some people may not be aware of the fact that crime scenes, even back then, were supposed to remain contaminant-free in order for them to process any evidence that might be present. When you introduce an outside force like a blanket, you have just contaminated that crime scene. Even if it is the purest blanket ever made, you have now contaminated the crime scene. Another misstep that they made
And that was the blanket from inside the house.
Yes.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yep. And another major misstep that they did was when a homicide victim is found, their hands are bagged. And that is to preserve any evidence that might be on those hands, including fingernail scrapings, where they can get DNA if the victim fought back and scratched their attacker, anything like that. Instead of doing that, once the SIDS arrived and they processed the crime scene, they placed both bodies in full body bags without the hands being bagged. Even in normal circumstances, the hands are almost always bagged before the body is placed inside of the body bag. So you've got all this going on. You have this character by the name of Mark Furman who's on scene. And Furman has a history already with them because he, as a young patrolman, responded to domestic violence calls from the Simpson household. So he knows who Nicole Brown Simpson is. He also knows who O.J. Simpson is. And later on, this is going to lead to the conspiracy theory that he had been having a sexual relationship with Nicole Brown Simpson from the time of that domestic violence call when he arrived up until her death. And even some people have gone so far as to say that he had had her killed because she did not want to continue the relationship. So there's a lot of craziness going on in this case.
You know the story about Don Simpson, right?
No, I have not
Movie
heard that
producer
one.
Don Simpson, who was a sadist, and he was one of the Heidi Fleiss clients. A woman, I believe it was, died in his house from cocaine. He called up Anthony Pellicano first, and Anthony Pellicano cleaned up the place, and then the first responding officer was Mark Furman.
I've actually heard something about that, but I never looked too far into it. There's a lot of that stuff in Hollywood where shady things are going on, and officers, help take care of a problem, or the Rampart scandal that happened a few years ago and is really still ongoing, where you've got gangs active inside various police precincts.
Yeah,
LA's its own beast, and I mean this case really proved it. Once things got rolling, and then it comes out that Furman had been in talks with a screenwriter and spoke in the most disparaging way possible about everybody involved in the case, as well as African Americans.
Yeah, he also talked about, I have a show called The Furman Tapes. He also talked about him and his friends, on duty, crashing through an apartment complex and beating the crap out of everybody. He didn't give specifics, but there was, you can look up the newspaper articles, that did happen.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that goes back to, what I was talking about with the Rampart case. That stuff has existed within the Los Angeles Police Department since at least the 1960s, where you get these gangs of cops that watch each other's backs. Many of them get matching tattoos. Yeah. There's a lot of corruption in the Los Angeles Police Department, and that really became a focal point in this case. And, the prosecution never addressed those issues, did not back up any of their officers, even the ones who weren't corrupt, and really just allowed the defense team to disparage everyone involved, as well as the investigation that they did.
Yeah, I think Furman, in his first 5 years as a cop, he was in 4 different divisions. They kept passing him around all over the place. And he was in traffic. This guy spent most of his career in traffic. And then, he had to sue. He sued LAPD to get his promotion to become a homicide investigator. So this guy, his whole career is shady from day one.
Well, yeah, and he had been passed around to the various various precincts. Yep. He tried to get into robbery and homicide, which is the special unit within the LAPD that takes the real high-profile cases, and they said no. There's too many questionable things within this guy's background for us to be comfortable taking him on and giving him this kind of power and authority. So right there you have a major red flag, and then it just continues from there when they find, the officers, Lang and Van Adder, decide that they're going to leave South Bundy and go over to the North Rockingham estate where Simpson lives. And who finds all of the evidence is Mark Furman. He's the one that starts looking at the Bronco that's parked cattywampus to the corner outside of the house. He's the one that finds the blood on the driver's side door, which was a single drop below the handle. He's the one that finds the bloody glove in the back alley.
Yeah, and the timing of finding those gloves doesn't match up either. He's pointing at that glove. The timestamp on that photo, it doesn't match with his story. And you got to go through the whole 5 hours I did with T.H. Johnson, man. It's like, while we were talking, I looked at the photo. He's right, man. It's the times don't match. It's just amazing what a mess this thing was.
Yeah, and a lot of that, unfortunately, is going to continues with this case. Is they have a very plausible scenario of what might have happened. Unfortunately, the chronological order of things is so skewed and so messed up that it doesn't line up with what the prosecution ends up claiming happened. A really great example of that is the prosecution settled on the crimes having taken place at 10:15 p.m. Well, the ear witnesses who lived near Nicole stated that the screams that they heard and the barking of the dog that they heard was more around the time of 10:45. So there's a half-hour discrepancy right there that the prosecution never addressed because they kept blinders on and focused on, this is when it happened and this is how it happened. They were unwilling to concede that, it may have been later than they initially suspected because they did not want to take any of these witnesses and put them on the stand. And that the case is just littered with
And a good case in point is the medical examiner who actually did the autopsy testified at the preliminary hearing that there were 2 knives, and they didn't even have him testify in the case in chief. They had his boss, who never touched a scalpel in this case, was the one who testified.
Well, not only that, they had that happen. They had members of the SIDS team testifying at court or in court, and the defense brought up that there may have been some procedural errors, and rather than just say I don't know anything about that, they admitted that this is probably the case. And the one SIDS investigator, Fong, after he's ripped apart on the stands, he goes up in open court in front of the TV news cameras and shakes the defense team's hands.
Yeah.
The defense, they put out the story they put out, but the prosecution basically handed them this case on a silver platter.
There was so many things too, man. Like Marsha Clark's ex-husband used to play at a poker game with OJ, and there was something too about the Scientologist pastor who married them, was involved, friends with them too as well. Very incestuous stuff, went on in that trial. And there's a lot. I've seen trials too where people know each other, and we're not going to put that in. That does happen.
Oh, it does happen, but there was so much intersection with all of these people on the case. Yeah. It's mind-boggling. Tom Lang is the one that got Marsha Clark on the case. After all of this stuff is processed, OJ agrees to go and talk to the police, something he later contested, stating that they arrested him and dragged him downtown. Well, according to the court records and the evidence and the tape recording, OJ went down there against the wishes of his then lawyers and agreed to speak with the police, agreed to give them a vial of his blood. So all of this happens. This is after Simpson comes back from Chicago, who Arnell Simpson, OJ's oldest daughter, contacted OJ, and Officer Lang informed him that Nicole had been killed, and Simpson is just like, oh my God, she's dead, I'll be right there. There's a whole lot of his reactions. Yeah, people say that his reactions weren't correct. Well, nobody can say what's correct and what's incorrect in a situation like this because everyone reacts different to this type of news.
You know what's bizarre, too? Howard Weitzman, who was his attorney, let him go to that interrogation alone, then quit later on because it said it was a conflict of interest. And Howard Weitzman was a Fourth Amendment drug attorney.
Yes.
You know what I mean? But there was a conflict of interest. So, yeah, there's just so much of the crap in this thing, you know?
Well, yeah, and Weitzman was also on a PBA board that oversaw internal affairs within the LAPD. That was a question of conflict of interest that the officers Lang and Van Adder actually brought up at the beginning of the case, because you've got this guy who's a major supporter of the police department, and he's defending someone who is now their best suspect. That's right there. You're going to have issues. But OJ didn't help his own case by, after they interviewed him or anything. He was really, flashing for the camera at every chance they got, because once the media really got a hold of the idea that, hey, OJ is a suspect in this, now he brings in Robert Shapiro. And, Shapiro's holding press conferences and all kinds of things. And it really built the circus that came out of this trial, is actions like that. OJ was very smart in getting the most charismatic legal team together that he possibly could. And it starts when he gets Robert Shapiro.
Yeah, and Alan Dershowitz, F. Lee Bailey, and Johnny Cochran, man, what a team.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, people wonder why OJ was, all but broke at the end of his life. Well, that kind of legal defense doesn't come cheap. He got the cream of the crop as far as legal defense attorneys go. Big names, they're not working for, $200 or $300 an hour.
And Barry Scheck is probably the richest one out of all of them now with his Innocence Project. He's probably making more money than the whole crew. And then, the downfall of Dr. Henry Lee, man. Oh, my God. Who would have ever thought that this guy would be living in disgrace right now,
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, this case had a serious ripple effect on everyone involved with it. Some people got some level of celebrity out of it, like Marcia Clark and Kato Kalin. Other people had their lives and their careers destroyed over this. Lang and Van Adder really never recovered from their involvement in this case. And, that comes from, again, the prosecution not standing up for the individuals who work for them. Because, I mean, once OJ's officially a suspect, Lang brings Marcia Clark in against Van Adder's wishes, and that's something most people don't know, is that Van Adder did not like or trust Clark. He thought that she was inadequate to handle a case of this magnitude.
Well, that was very bizarre, too. I forget his name, but the actual district attorney had some kind of heart attack or something, or a panic attack in the middle of the night. And even when the paparazzi was there when the ambulance comes, and he's waving at the cameras as they're taking him away at the end of the ambulance. What a bizarre, everything is so, but looking back, it's just so bizarre.
Well, yeah, and that's, people that were born in this current generation don't understand. Okay, this wasn't like the Casey Anthony trial where, it was on court TV every day, but that was it. This case was everywhere. Yeah. You could not turn on television or go and look at a magazine without encountering something about the O.J. Simpson murder case. And a big part of that, again, is OJ's, response to everything. The police inform Robert Kardashian and Shapiro that, hey, we're issuing an arrest warrant for OJ Simpson. And they arrange for OJ to turn himself in, and OJ never shows up. And this is an image that's burned into the mind of a generation of people. That afternoon, there's O.J. Simpson and Al Cowlings driving slowly down the freeway in Al Cowlings' white Bronco with police cars giving chase. As O.J. is inside the vehicle on the phone with Officer Lang, saying he's going to kill himself. He's got a gun to his head. They broke into every program that was on television to cover this. I know people who were in the television industry at the time whose businesses were adversely affected by this because their programs were preempted for the O.J. Simpson Bronco chase. This was a major, major deal.
I'm trying to remember. I had that guy on from the LAPD intelligence department. He wrote a couple of books. I had him on the show about 3 or 4 times. Mm-hmm. And he told me, he says, Ed, man, they had this guy on complete surveillance, and they pulled him off right before he took off. And then you hear other people talking about how the Joey Ippolito had a boat there ready to go. Okay. And I hear these stories, man. Or a plane, whatever that was, and a boat ready to go in Florida. What about Alex Constantine? You ever look into his work, his research on this as it was happening?
No, I've never encountered him. Was he one of the PIs that worked on the case?
No. Alex Constantine is a brilliant researcher who did all back on Usenet. See, you're talking about before about Channel 11.
Yeah.
Okay, this is back in Usenet when the internet first started. And this guy was deep in all stuff about Michael Aquino, about McMartin Preschool, about OJ, and writing this stuff while it was happening, right deep in all this kind of stuff. And I talked to him now. He believes, first of all, he was threatened by the mafia over the OJ story, organized crime, and he believes now that when he talks about stuff that he's being targeted by like electronic devices that cause him to need eye surgery and stuff. I'm trying to get him to come on the show. Mm-hmm. I was a huge fan of this guy. Most of the stuff I talk about, I learned. I was tuned into this stuff by Alex Constantine, so I'm hoping I can get him to come on the show. But anyway, we're talking to Ian Totten. Go to Ian Totten's TikTok at deathcast_official. You can find him on Facebook at Deathcast. Deathcast.simplecast is where you can find all of his podcasts. And the most important thing is we want you to go, please, to save our ship on GoFundMe to really help him with his family. He had all these kind of problems. We might have to have you come back to fill in more of this. Let me see. We got about... we got 4.5 minutes left, man. What can we do with that?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's so many aspects of this story, and I tried to cover all of them they're out there in the public record, but people just aren't interested in going and finding this information out for themselves. You mentioned an individual you had on the show, the doctor who did his own forensic investigation of the murders, as well as the timeline of events that were presented by the prosecution, which doesn't line up with the actual facts of the case. A big bone of contention was and always has been the fact that the Browns left the restaurant, and 45 minutes later, Judy Brown's on the phone with her daughter, letting her know that she left her eyeglasses at the restaurant. And that's how Ron Goldman comes into this whole thing. That's all well and good, but the Browns lived an hour and a half to 2 hours from the restaurant in Los Angeles. Unless they were doing warp speed down the freeway, there's no possible way for them to have gotten home in the time frame that the prosecution alleged in order to make that phone call. There's also the fact that doctor, he has the documentation. You can find it in his research. One was a book called Serpents Rising that I learned about on your show. Another was a movie he did under the same title. On the night of the murders that the Brown family took was major construction in an already congested area of Los Angeles, and traffic was backed up for at least 45 minutes. It's not possible for them to have gotten from the restaurant unless they can, transport themselves through buildings to get around all of this traffic, because the traffic was on the freeway, and have gotten home in that time period. It's physically impossible for that to have happened. So something with that time frame is off. The fact that the prosecution decided not to have the phone records admitted into evidence during the trial, and that the despite Freedom of Information Act requests, the prosecution and the phone company have denied everyone's access to the phone records for that evening and have now claimed that they were destroyed.
Just incredible. And when you look at who profited from this even more than Barry Scheck was the Kardashians.
Oh, yeah.
For people who don't know, Keeping Up with the Kardashians, they're famous because their dad somehow was on that legal defense team. He was a lawyer. He wasn't even a licensed attorney at the time, but he's the one who got the golf bag and the garment bag from OJ in front of his house and quietly. How the hell did that happen?
Yeah, there's so many things in this story that don't make sense.
Yeah.
That you know, if you really want to know what happened during it, you need to look at all of the evidence, but you know, not just what's out there in the mainstream, the normal, you know, everyday accepted narrative, but also facts that have come forward that can be verified of things that happened, you know, like the garment bag, and witnesses that the prosecution refused to put on the stand for whatever reason, such as the individual who stated that they saw OJ dumping a garment bag at the airport.
Well, and also to a woman that saw him in his car by the crime scene.
Well, she perjured herself, actually. She saw him at around 10:55 blowing through a traffic light, and when they did the grand jury hearings on it, they asked her, had she told her story to anyone else, and she stated, "I've only told it to my friends and family." Well, that night, a previously taped interview aired on hard copy where she told the whole story. She perjured herself on the stand, and they, in my opinion, rightfully decided not to use her. And she was also paid $5,000 for that appearance.
Right.
You know, you had a lot of this happening in this case, and it was just a big snowball effect of, you know, improper prosecution, not, you know, doing the things that you would think they would do, but also the media getting so involved that they really blew large holes in the evidence that the prosecution was able to use by talking to various witnesses. And that comes down to, you know, the police department and the DA's office not protecting their witnesses.
Well, not only that, but just think all the media attention on this, and I can guarantee you the average person who just doesn't know any of the things we talked about today. And one of the most important ones, I interviewed Dr. Fred Whitehurst, who's an FBI whistleblower. This guy was at Oklahoma City bombing, and he solved that case. This guy was the first World Trade Center bombing. He solved that case. He was there ready to testify for the defense that there was EDTA, a preservative found in the blood on the socks. And they didn't even need him. They were so convinced of this case. But we are out of time. We've been talking to TikTok, Deathcast_official. On Facebook, you can find Ian Totten at Deathcast. His website is deathcast.simplecast. But the most important thing here really is, if you can do anything for me tonight, go to his GoFundMe, save our ship. The guy's got a beautiful family. He's working his butt off, you know, and we really need your support to help him out in this situation. Keep the electric on, you know, so you can keep the oxygen machine on in the United States in 2024. Ian Totten, thank you so much, my friend.
Thank you so much for having me on, Ed. I really appreciate it.
Well, we got to have you come back, and we'll do another one on OJ. I'm not like there's nothing to talk about, right?
Certainly.
We can do 6 months on this thing, and still not cover everything.
Oh yeah, I did 2.5 solid months covering this case.
I'll give you a quick one. Christy Brody, OJ's girlfriend, who was a Nicole lookalike. 100 domestic violence cases between the two. When OJ was in prison, he had a cell phone, and she had text messages from OJ that she wanted to sell those text messages. You know who her agent was brokering that deal? Gina Rodriguez, the same one who brokered the Stormy Daniels deal.
Yeah.
Small world, my friend.
Yes, it is.
Ian Totten, good night.
Yep, good night.
Thank you.